Microphone check 1 2 1 2. Good morning, good evening, good night, good afternoon, good dusk, good dawn. Shout out to my Spotify listeners, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and special shout out to my listeners out in Belgium. I'm checking my analytics and I see you guys are coming back. So big shout out to Belgium in the house. Big shout out to India, my other international listeners. Coming live from my voice to your phone, computer, headphones, TV, car stereo, smartwatch, Bluetooth speaker. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here right now. Please take a moment to recognize that it is now, right now. Whether you're working, running, exercising, cleaning, laying down, flying, driving, be grateful we're alive. Failure can be frightening. However, as Winston Churchill reminds us, success is all about going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm. And in the spirit of going from failure to failure, I lost all the audio for this episode. So we're going to talk about perfectionism, and you get to hear draft 2 of perfectionism because draft 1 is lost to time completely. But this is I Will Not Lose podcast, where we set out to prove that everything is learned from failure and we must persevere and recognize it as one step closer to success. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz. Let's jump right in. Perfectionism and failure. How do these relate? I didn't spend a whole lot of time on my notes in the spirit of the episode. I figure I'll practice what I preach with this whole podcast thing. And I say, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just go ahead, jump in and do it. And I went in and I did it. It was all right, man. It was a pretty dope episode. And then as I was editing it, I realized I lost all the audio. I halfway thought about putting out the camera audio, which would have sounded terrible if you're used to a listening experience. There's nothing like a mic into an interface versus like an on-phone camera or an on-camera mic. So thankfully you get draft 2 if all goes according to plan. But part of what makes me comfortable talking about what I talk about is I speak from experience. So perfectionism is not some topic that I quickly did some research on in order to put together a podcast episode. This is something that I struggle with and continue to struggle with. So this podcast is going to act as a self-reminder to myself to stop always trying to be perfect. And there's a difference between striving for excellence and reaching for perfection, which is unattainable. So keeping those things in mind, you still want to try, you still want to put something out. I mean, I had, my daughter had a friend over and they were upstairs giggling. Somebody was running the vacuum cleaner and I'm just thinking, oh, well, doesn't have to be perfect. Keep on. So it's actually great that we are re-recording the episode. But if you've ever heard of like a reporter or a journalist covering a topic that you could tell they don't know or don't care about, it just sounds like robotic and foolish and stuff. So rather than try to cover everything, so think about success, learn from failure, and persevering, think about maladaptive mindsets that I've had myself, like perfectionism or imposter syndrome that we talked about on last episode. And who would have thought my little notes of putting together something to talk about could have reached out and inspire people. So people actually reached out to me that the episode had touched them personally. And I thought that was really awesome. I mean, the likes, the comments are great, but when you get a phone call from somebody saying that's something you did, it just gives me all the reason to keep putting this out every week. So let's talk perfectionism. What is it? It's a common trait that many people possess. It could be a positive quality that drives individuals towards excellence, but it can also lead to feelings of inadequacy and fear of failure. This fear of failure can prevent individuals from taking risks, trying new things, reaching their full potential. So in this podcast episode, we're going to explore how perfectionism can hold you back and what you can do to break free from the need to be perfect. So a lot of people don't get into starting something because they have a fear of what the public is going to think of them. And this is It's understandable. This is deeply rooted in our psychology. I mean, for millennia, if you didn't go along with what society did, you were outcast. You were thrown out. So if you go back to tribes, you were pretty much kicked out of the village and told you were you're dead. Pretty much. I mean, live on your own. I'm sure there's the story of the outcasts that went on to thrive on their own. But for the most part, you needed society to live and to move throughout human evolution. So we have something rooted in our psychology when we get into it, comes out when you have the fear of public speaking, when people get in front of a bunch of people and you're essentially forcing yourself to be judged on a stage, we start to get overwhelming feelings and people fear it worse than death because in most senses, judging of the society would lead to your death. So I like to think that in 2023, if you're an outcast, I guarantee there's a subreddit somewhere with thousands of people that feel the exact same way that you feel. So it's in an interconnected society, it's a lot harder to be quote unquote outcast. So I don't know, for whatever reason, I don't know if I've worked through it through practicing in public speaking or if I just never really gave a fuck what people think. But, sorry to be so crude, but it really doesn't affect me, in the way that the style that I dress, some people would say it's great. Some people would say it's terrible. So I'm comfortable with it. So it works out for me. Depending on who I'm meeting or what I'm doing, I'll dress for the occasion and go from there. But for the most part, it's not that I follow trends. I wouldn't quite call myself a trendsetter, but I'm just kind of immune to it. I don't feel the need to jump onto something if everybody else is on it. I mean, case in point, Hogwarts Legacy has been out for like 2 weeks at the time of recording this, and I haven't bought it yet. Still haven't found any spoilers on the internet, but no, honestly, trends can do what they have to do. But one thing to keep in mind is that you're not going to be absolutely perfect. So setting up attainable goals for yourself. When I say the difference between striving for excellence and striving for perfection, let's take a second on that. Many people believe that striving for perfection is the same as striving for excellence, but in reality, they're very, very different. Striving for excellence is about doing your best, pushing yourself to be better, and continually improving. Striving for perfection, on the other hand, is about trying to be flawless and mistake-free, which is not realistic or attainable. It's important to recognize the difference between these two mindsets so that you can focus on growth and progress rather than perfection. So, what does this mean? I mean, when I got into podcasting, I knew that it wasn't going to be perfect. I knew what equipment it takes to put on a show like The Rogan Experience or Flagrant, and I knew I didn't have the budget. So setting my goals for being as good as a nationally syndicated radio show, you're setting yourself up for failure. So when I came into it, I knew there was going to be mistakes and I accounted for as many as I could, but I didn't let it stop me from dropping the first episode. I read on our podcasting on Reddit, somebody was saying, if you're going to get into podcasting, know that your first 10 episodes are essentially going to be throwaways. And that's let alone if you're trying to syndicate to video as well, like we are. Shout out to the YouTube viewership. But you have to know that you have to drill, you have to practice, you have to work your way towards getting towards something better. So if you wait for it to be perfect, if you're going to travel the ocean and you're going to build the perfect ship that can account for all the wind and all the different sized waves, and then you realize there's bigger waves, so you rebuild the ship for those bigger waves, then you realize that there's storms that, rotate in a different direction, so you need sails that can do this. You're going to continue. You're never going to go on your voyage. You're just going to continue to make everything perfect. So while you still want to say, okay, it doesn't mean you just slap together a ship and start going and figure it out as you go. You want to account for as much as you can. But even though I went, built a studio, picked out my mics, talked to some audio engineers, I still forgot to put batteries in my damn smoke detector for the first 2 episodes. It was funny. My first guest came over, shout out to Gil Thompson, and his wife heard the recording and she gave me some batteries. So he brought batteries, and I wasn't even paying attention. We didn't put him in for that episode. So, I'm a living example of the stuff that I talk about. That's why I don't try to be an expert on things that I'm not, but I absolutely have suffered from perfectionism, and it can lead to procrastination and avoidance. Perfectionism can lead to procrastination and avoidance because when we feel like we have to be perfect, we may become overwhelmed or paralyzed by fear. We may put off tasks because we're afraid of making mistakes or because we want to make sure everything is just right. This can lead to missed opportunities and feelings of regret. Oh, this is so true. So I just finished a documentary, Moving Us Forward, African American Contributions to the City of Bayonne. And we put it up. It's airing twice a day for the next 10 days for the remainder of Black History Month. Well, at the time of recording this, it will have already aired for about a week. And it's going to air a little bit into March. But there was a deadline, a very realistic. People had come together and put interviews for something that is coming out during Black History Month. If we would have went and got all the audio completely crisp, there were some things that we just couldn't redo. And it still came out to be a beautiful presentation, and it's still going to air. But one thing that I've learned personally, I know on the podcast, I say, well, I'm going to record anyway. My neighbors are recording. One of my listeners said to me, we can never hear your neighbor's music. So if you wouldn't have said anything, we wouldn't have thought anything of it. It's huh. So here I am thinking that I have to wait, but if it's not being picked up or it's being cleaned up in post, I guess we don't have to worry about it anyway. So I am so glad that I jumped right into it, started before I was ready, and I'm still not ready. I'm sure this is still mistakes that are absolutely unexcusable for somebody on a major podcast network. But you know what? We're growing with listenership. So that's the idea, There's a link between perfectionism and anxiety and depression. Perfectionism can lead to anxiety and depression because when you feel like you have to be perfect, you put a lot of pressure on yourself. You may become anxious about making mistakes or not living up to others' expectations. And you can almost feel depressed if you experience a setback or a failure. So I suffer from this a lot. I put huge pressure on myself and hold myself to a high standard, especially when it comes to my creative business or, I'm not going to lie, just about anything I do, I throw myself into it 150%. And I have to remind myself constantly of my achievements, not from an egotistical standpoint, but just being able to say, okay, I did something, I put it out. Okay, so I put out 2 bad episodes to start out. I think this is episode number 18. So we've been going on 4 months now, and it's okay. We've put out bad episodes. We've put out great episodes. I don't know where this one's going to fall on it, but I'd assume that we're getting better and better each time that we go. So one thing I know is if I tried to be perfect, there's no way I'd be able to drop every week. There's no way. There's absolutely no way. So strategies for letting go of perfectionism. Set realistic expectations. Focus on progress rather than perfection. I recently came across this quote, and I just want to stick on this for a second, but focus on progress rather than perfection. If you see that you're going up, keep going and make sure you take notice of your progress. You have to take steps. You have to mark milestones. You have to celebrate victories. So to let go of perfectionism, it's important to set realistic expectations. Recognize that perfection is not attainable and that making mistakes is a normal and necessary part of growing and learning. Focus on progress rather than perfection. Celebrate your success, no matter how small they may be. Practice self-compassion and give yourself permission to make mistakes. Oh gosh, giving myself permission to make mistakes. It's funny because the one thing that I do that I create with that I don't get paid for is this podcast. And so for some reason, because I'm not getting paid for it, I gave myself the ability to make mistakes, and I challenge myself to put it out. I still have a level of quality that I care about personally, that when I put my name on something, I want to be there. But I wouldn't say this podcast is that level of excellence. I think it's good and I think we do our best, but there's definitely room for growth and there's things that we can do. And we're constantly checking out mistakes and trying to improve on the next episode. So try it even in things that you do get paid for, you make, give yourself room to make mistakes. I know it might be hard if you're in a job that doesn't like taking risks or things like that, but if you could reframe your failures as opportunities for growth and learning. So instead of seeing failures as a reflection of your worth or something to be ashamed of, reframe them as opportunities for growth and learning. Ask yourself, what can you learn from your failures and how you can use them to improve? Reframe your mindset from one of, I can't do this, to, I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm learning. Even on the side, I haven't talked about it much, but I'm training jujitsu and learning self-defense. And one of the greatest things is just knowing that there's levels of belts that are unattainable in my lifetime. Even if I started in my 20s, it would have been unattainable in my lifetime just because the amount of time that it takes. So knowing that there's never going to be a perfect journey for myself, I'm able to focus on the steps that I'm taking and be able to realize that making mistakes and learning is part of it. And I'm excited to look back a year from them, or, as I'm a blue belt, and look back and say, wow, look how terrible I was. And look at all those mistakes I was making. I'm glad that I persevered through those and kept going. So breaking free from perfectionism. Self-care, self-compassion. Practicing self-compassion means treating yourself with kindness, understanding, acceptance. Don't treat yourself with self-criticism or judgment. I know if my mom's listening to this episode, she's going to be like, all right, he finally got it. He's telling me this all the time. Don't judge myself. Don't criticize myself. I mean, you have to find the balance, because being critical of myself does make me good at what I do, but it's not healthy to do it at a ridiculous level. So taking care of my physical, emotional, mental health needs, I'm better equipped to handle setbacks and failures. This was going to be the last episode. Actually, last episode was going to be the last episode. I was just going to not drop and not do this anymore. I thought, it takes 20 minutes to re-record. I got to do the editing and stuff, but I was going to do that anyway. We're still going to drop on time. It's all good. So I can just say that this personal journey to be vulnerable, embrace imperfection, it's something that I've been doing throughout the podcast without even realizing it. So I figured, why not bring it full circle and, put it into an episode. So it's important to recognize the benefits of embracing imperfection and vulnerability. When you let go of the need to be perfect, you free yourself up to take risks, to try new things, to learn from your mistakes. Embracing vulnerability means being authentic and genuine, which can help you build deeper connections with others. By embracing imperfection and vulnerability, you can live a more fulfilling and authentic life. And who doesn't want to live a more fulfilling and authentic life, man? So that's about all I got for the show notes. I did want to take some time out and shout out a few things that inspire me that I figure I could throw out there publicly. But I listened to the latest episode of SC360, Socially Connected 360 podcast with Louis D. Garcia. Man, that's a great ride. He drops every couple of weeks, and he's got great guests on there. The last one I listened to was legally blind. I believe the man was legally blind, ran across the United States 50 miles a day. I mean, you had me at 50 miles one day. Man, imagine running across with that sort of adversity. So that really had me inspired. And then he had, I want to say it was Roy Schuler. I hope I'm not messing the name up, but he had an actor on the most recent one. And listening to that podcast just lets me realize, okay, there's definitely a level to strive for, definitely great content. So there was that. I was working on a logo and I saw Empower 610 drop their new episode. And I was like, man, I'm in a groove right now. I can't listen to it because I really want to pay attention to it. And as I'm Instagramming back and forth with Bardalis, he tells me, oh, yeah, we shouted you out in the episode we're about to drop. And I'm thinking, oh, that's that episode. So luckily, I got to re-record because I was able to check that episode out. These guys always inspire me. I told him I was on the fence about dropping a podcast, and their pilot episode was called Everybody Has a Podcast. And I saw that thumbnail and I was like, that's it. I'm doing it. I reached out to Nice Jones personally and told him, yep, you tipped the scale. We're doing this now. So shout out to the local podcast that I listen to and get inspiration from. Another one is Miguel Reyes with his Staying Fit ODAT, One Day at a Time, ODAAT. Great podcast, great message. Other than that, there's a lot of nationally syndicated podcasts, but they definitely get enough shout outs. So you guys know I mention them a lot, who I listen to and where I get inspiration from. But you cannot forget about the local podcasts because these guys are working hard to put out great content that moves and inspires me. So I just become a conduit of things that they say. And I think it's great. Announcements. Don't have anything. It's season 2. So all that means is we changed the background. Same show, same premise. This is I Will Not Lose podcast, where we challenge the idea that everything is learned from failure. Nothing is learned from success. And we got to pick ourselves up from mishaps and persevere. To support the show, visit the website shows.acast.com/I Will Not Lose and subscribe on your favorite podcast player. Share the episode link, leave a comment. And soon there will be a tip jar for contributions. I'm going to work on getting that set up. It's not huge on my priority list, but I think it would be pretty cool if you guys could buy me a coffee. And I'm going to make it easy for you. You know, none of this mailing a check or any of this antiquated forms of money transfer. Throw a Cash App or something like that. But your contribution is appreciated. Thank you for listening.